All right, hello. Week number 5 for LAI 560. Chapter 5 in Words That Work. My biggest takeaway from this chapter is the quote that says, "There is no evidence that readers learn these words in a different way, but like all word learning at this stage, repetition and in and out of context, along with word study, help secure these words in memory." On page 150. The more I read about how slow and difficult reading for first graders is, the more I realize that my ability to read fluently and with expression was rare. I won awards for it. I never thought much of it. I'm still great at it today, but when I read in class to my students, I always attribute their lack of ability to read with expression and fluency to the fact that they lack desire. I can't say it's lack of practice because they read on their phones constantly. Perhaps this reading ability at such a young age also explains why I was writing stories as a child. I never struggled with writing either. My only struggle is with typing and texting. My fingers type letters out of order. I never write that way, however. We didn't type until high school when I was young. Now they do it as soon as they learn letters. In the vocabulary learning section, it mentions how children's vocabularies will grow when they have more interaction with people using language. This is something that baffles me to this day about learning a foreign language in high school. Kids never actually use the language. When I was in Korea, actually using the language on a daily basis made it much easier. I found that many of the things I learned, I did not learn the right way, and I had to adapt to the actual way people use the language every day. With constant exposure to books and conversation, my own kids grew up with extensive vocabularies. Two of my kids went on to be highly accomplished writers, and one is a highly successful lawyer. It shows that through exposure and practice, kids can learn. The text mentions making sure that we make up for literacy deficits in underprivileged kids. Cultural norms and expectations can make motivating those kids very difficult. In some cultures, it is not acceptable to be smart in school because it makes them too white. We fight an uphill battle in high school to get them interested in language at all. My last thought on this chapter is the section on sophisticated synonyms on page 152. The author states that we shouldn't dumb down the language we use with children and should consciously elevate our language and provide some appropriate explanations, repeated exposure, and opportunities for them to use that same language on page 152. I agree in theory. It's like every other pie in the sky theory we are given about teaching. When we actually get in front of the students, doesn't actually seem to work the way they say it should. I would be interested to hear how many high schoolers can define the words used in this paragraph: allocate, amiable, and proficient. I'm sure some could, but I fear many could not. It's not from lack of exposure. Actually, a coworker of mine shared with me today, and I didn't add this in my thing, but I added as an ad lib. He mentioned that when learning about adjectives way back in the day, he's in his 70s, so this was a long time ago. Um, they used to say that an adjective would modify the noun. He said he didn't understand that concept because no one ever explained the word modify. In reading number 1, Beyond Labels and Agendas, PA lesson does rhyme. Okay, so I made notes for myself to remember that PA lesson does rhyming of things like at. Phonics focuses on the letter in the beginning sound like P. That's more of a reminder for myself. We work with physical positioning of lips, tongue, and teeth when working with ENL students. I have seen other teachers use sound charts that show positioning so the students have a reference when working individually. It seems to help. When I started learning Korean, it was also helpful to me to understand how they make sounds because they are different than in English. The usage of a tongue in the way they do almost constitute a lisp, but not quite. So think like the sound do, for example. They bring their tongues very far forward, do, almost as if it's touching the lips. I found the vowel flexing story idea interesting on page 67, having kids stop when they reach a vowel and then trying out the sounds they know for that vowel in the context of a sentence. I find high schoolers and especially adults don't pay attention to context clues while reading. It always shocks me when I listen to a teacher read to a class and make glaring mistakes that don't make sense. If it's painfully obvious, they'll go back and correct, otherwise, they just keep going. I guess in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter quite as much sometimes. Reading number 2, timing and teaching of word families. Rhyme is the at in cat. Again, a little note for myself. Word families help kids make associations between like words more quickly, thus increasing their vocabulary recognition exponentially. All I wrote for that. Reading number 3, the P word revisited 8 principles. Differentiation, orthographic mapping, and contextual readings. Newly minted first grade teacher. God, I'd be crying my eyes out. I wouldn't want to teach elementary at all. No offense to those who do. I love these questions they say the teacher will have. I think that all teachers suffer those issues. I rarely find anyone who actually addresses them, though. It's like a secret we all have to struggle with and figure out on our own. What do you do when your lesson fails? Or where should you go from here? No one knows. Somehow veteran teachers do, but they don't tell you. It's like a rite of passage to freak out and have no idea what to do next. I then kind of wrote down the 8 principles. Teach the spelling system so kids can learn and just not memorize. You want them to be able to read a word, use a word, and understand a word. I finally find this to be highly flawed, especially with high schoolers. Many don't care about words and whether they got it right unless it's on a test. Number two, know how to look at a word. No one cares about etymology except a select few, and certainly not our students. Teach patterns, not rules. I never had any phonics exposure in my undergrad at all. It wasn't until I went for a master's in TESOL that I learned all of this. Why is that? I took a linguistic class in my undergrad, but we learned more about Pidgin and Creole and things like vocal fry, which I still get crazy, freaked out over every time I hear it than anything else. Number three, go for patterns, not rules. How do you account for 50-year-old people spelling it Loose instead of Lose or Loosing instead of Losing? So loosing instead of losing. Did they have crappy second grade teachers? Number four, explicit and systematic. So, another problem with this method of decoding a word is that we hardly ever have students read in an environment that allows them to take 5 minutes to figure out a word. When we are having students read aloud and they stumble on a word, we correct them almost instantly. They don't look at the word stray in a book, then look to the soundboard and figure out AY is a sound they know, and then sound out the S and the T. That would take forever, and they'd be getting laughed at in the process. Skill builders and games. Number five, give them more chances to practice the skills than to lecture them. Pretty straightforward. Number six, use as many resources as you can. A class like this is great for elementary school teachers. Having an ENL teacher push in is great for middle school and high school ENL learners, but what about the rest of the kids? When reading, we simply provide the proper pronunciation and move on. Oh, excuse me. Number seven, assess and figure out what they need. I love these because you have time to work with every single kid alone and in depth, and you know exactly what support they need and where to get it for them. Insert eye roll. Big time. Again, stuff that veteran teachers seem to know, and those of us that are starting out have no clue. Number eight, students learn this stuff so they can master never need it again. Well, apparently some adults could benefit from this as well as many high school students. Is this where we fail when a kid enters high school is developmentally behind? Is it because we shuttled them through and didn't make sure they got it before we let them go? How do you ensure that doesn't happen? How do you work with that eighth grader one-on-one before they move to high school? Chances are, unless they go to resource room, you don't. Oh, where am I recording this? Sorry. Here we are.